Well, good evening and welcome to Gospel Conversations. You're being hosted tonight by the Diocese of Dunedin, and as a theme, we have a gathering of four of us here, various Christians with various backgrounds, and we are discussing the Gospel for today. And we have been trawling through the Gospel of Luke, and we've come tonight to an extremely tricky passage. And we've got discussing that passage. We have Peg, who's from Christchurch, Joel from Dunedin, as am I, and Anne, the Right Reverend Doctor Anne Van Gent, Bishop of Dunedin. And Anne, I believe that you're going to give us some background on this passage from Luke's Gospel.
Yes, joy and delight. What I wanted to do actually was go back a bit to the beginning of chapter 11 and kind of build up to where we are rather than parachute straight into this difficult reading. And so chapter 11 begins with Jesus, a kind of peaceful scene, quietly teaching his disciples how to pray. And then as he's setting a man free from the demons that oppress him, some people start accusing him of casting out demons by the prince of demons. And I actually think this is a crucial turning point because it's the point where it becomes clear that it is possible to look straight at love and goodness and see darkness and evil if we're determined to do so. And, shortly afterwards, Jesus says, your eye is the lamp of your body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body's full of light. But if it's not healthy, your body's full of darkness. So it's possible to warp our own vision enough that the good is seen to be bad and evil is proclaimed as goodness. And that lies behind the whole series of warnings that Jesus then throws at the Pharisees and the scribes, who are people who've dedicated their lives to the Torah and the temple, and yet are blind guides. They can't see that the light within them has become dark. And Jesus' words are tough, but they're aimed at curing their blindness, and they are furious to hear them. So that's the context where we start chapter 12. And Jesus then turns back to his disciples in the midst of the crowds and continues the task of preparing them for what a life of faith may ask of them in the context of all that we've just heard and read. So don't let those who pretend that evil is good and good is evil infect you. Hold firm. Don't let the fears of life drive you. Trust in the reality of God's love. And then in this passage, he breaks it to them that doing all this, holding firm to the truth and the light and refusing to be drawn into the darkness, will inevitably bring anger from others and division for us, just as it did for Jesus. So he's not saying here that this division and everything is the will of God or that it should be this way. Jesus himself would so much rather that it wasn't happening to him, but it's how humanity is, and he's telling us we need to be prepared.
Thank you for that, Anne. It's certainly a challenging passage. And Joel, I was wondering, challenges that you see in this passage.
Okay, the challenge that I saw is accepting that division is a natural thing which happens in our world. And I would love to actually know, and I'm sure if I spent enough time reading some commentaries, I would love to know why all of the divisions that Jesus has mentioned are intergenerational. It's not son versus daughter, husband versus wife. It's father versus son. I'm curious, but I just haven't had the time to actually research. So maybe you could shed some light on that. But I find some of the best conversations I have, especially about God, when there is a bit of division, when there is a little bit of a disagreement going on, or sometimes a very strong disagreement. And so the challenge for me is to take those divisions and almost inject Christ and some grace into those conversations, into those divisions, so that Christ actually remains at the heart of these divisions and the conversations we have around them, rather than just walking away and going, okay, I disagree with you, end of topic. Let's actually talk about it, but talk about it with grace and love.
Thank you so much. Peg, challenges you see in this interesting passage.
Challenges. It's a very jarring passage, especially for those in the church who would like to see Jesus as only meek and mild and comforting. But it's essential for us to hear this about that he's a disturber, not just a comforter, that it's he's come to ignite and to upend and disrupt. And we have to be ready for that. And we have to remain loyal to Jesus through that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's thought-provoking from all of you. And Anne, give me the challenge. Please,
Okay.
Anne.
This time, the verse that stood out for me was, you know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky. Why do you not know how to interpret the present time? What's he talking about here? He could have been talking about their inability to interpret his presence there. He could have been talking about their inability to interpret what was going on in terms of their relationship with Rome, leading up to the sack of Jerusalem, whatever. But my challenge is whether we're taking care to interpret our present time, to really see where things are heading and test them out in light of the gospel before we swallow them. So how easily do we as a church slip into acceptance of the attitudes and the life tips and the jargon of our society without really thinking about it? Or bigger things, how blindly are we embracing AI and the possibility of transhumanism without really interpreting them? I always think of the school board chair who told me proudly that they had a paperless classroom. And when I asked her what educational research she'd found that would say that having a paperless classroom was good for education, she'd have looked at me blankly and said, but it's the way of the future. And that was all that mattered. And I think we tend to do that. We don't actually interpret the time we're in and where we're heading. That's a challenge.
Certainly is. Peg, good news for you in this passage.
There's serious good news. The good news for me is that Jesus has come to bring change, to kindle this holy fire, that it shows the depth of his commitment to God's changing the world, healing the world. As Joel was saying, division doesn't necessarily mean bad news, but it's the sign of transformation and growth and clarity. You're invited to wake up, see the signs. Yeah, that's the good news.
And good news for you, Joel.
The good news, I went to probably the same verse that Anne did for inspiration about casting fire upon the earth and how he wishes it was already ablaze. And I read into that some of the prophecy of what was actually going to come ahead for Jesus with his death and resurrection, and what that new fire actually meant. And then I started to sort of dwell on the metaphor of the forest fire, or in some cases a controlled burn off, where there are seeds which need that fire to actually help them germinate. And out of the ashes, out of that what appears to be a grim situation, new life springs. And if you've ever been in a valley where there's been a forest fire go through, that new life springs up really, really quickly and flourishes. And I think that's one of the good news things that we've got to look forward to, is that the new life that comes from the fire that Jesus kindled.
Thank you. And Anne, good news for you.
Just impressed that you two came up with great news, because I struggled with this one a little bit. I think what I came back to is that picture we get in Psalm 23 of the shepherd walking through the valley of the shadow of death and leading us through it to the light and the feasting beyond. So, Jesus here is warning us of the baptism of fire, which he's going to go through, which may face us at any time. But the point is that he is undergoing it himself voluntarily. So he is walking through that valley of death so that he can lead us on that same path. And it's a valley that doesn't begin on Golgotha. It begins with every act of hatred towards him, every rejection, every division, every physical and mental pain. Jesus is there first, with his hand outstretched, leading us through to the light.
Thank you. So good news and a challenge, but what does it mean in our lives? So Joel, this passage, so what?
I went hunting for a so what, and it took me a little while, and I read a few commentaries. And a couple of the commentaries I read talked about the cost of these divisions, and that's the cost to us of being Christian, and the cost of us standing up, and the price that we pay. And I really struggled with that, because I actually see the so what as that opportunity that we are given to work on these divisions and actually talk about them and shine that light of Christ into people who see things differently. And rather than seeing it as a cost, seeing it as an opportunity to be that fire on the earth that Christ is talking about, and actually being living examples, and not necessarily breaking down those divisions, but understanding why somebody has a disagreement with us, and also helping them understand why we are different to them.
Thank you. Peg, so what from this passage?
If I expect to live my life by following Jesus Christ, then I should expect the tension that I'll face being in this world, and be willing to be uncomfortable with that tension, and to be able to see where God is actually working, interpret the times and see where God is asking us to change, and speak into that change and act into that change and love into that change.
Thank you. And Anne,
Well,
so what?
very similar, I think. We are to seek peace, to do all we can to bring about peace, but we have to do so in the knowledge that it may not be accepted. So, as I said before, non-violent peacemakers often end up violently dead. So if we're going to genuinely seek peace and reconciliation on a personal level or a national level or a global level, we have to do so realistically. It's a bit like being told that we're to love our enemies as well as our friends. It sounds nice, but the chances are good that they're not going to love us back. And so there's no point then in trying and getting all hurt and disappointed if we don't get the warm fuzzies that we'd hoped for. Jesus is bluntly real about all of this. We need to love, not expecting love in return. We need to forgive, even if we're not being forgiven by them. We need to seek peace, even if they're unwilling to give it, which is hard and simply humanly impossible. So requires that we are repeatedly drenched in God's own love and forgiveness for us.
Well, Peg, Anne, and Joel, thank you for your conversation about this tricky gospel from Luke chapter 12, beginning at verse 49. Thank you. I found it illuminating, and I wish you every blessing.
Thank you.